of a continuum. It is part of a legacy that has come before, particularly in the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So the second objective is to re-establish the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And what's interesting to look at is the structure of the surah, because the structure of the surah actually reveals a lot about what the theme is. What you find is that Surah Maryam can be divided into three main parts. Number one is about the children of Ishaq alayhi salam, or the Bani Israel. And then number three, the last part, it discusses the children of Ismail, the Bani Ismail that are known as the Arab. So the first part is about the Bani Israel, the third part is about the Bani Ismail, and the middle part is where both of these two great prophets converge. Ishaq and Ismail alayhi salam. The middle part is the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So in reality, this entire surah discusses the theme of family. And that's why every story in the surah you'll find is about family. And what you'll also find is that this surah has the most mention of compassion and mercy, of the word Rahmah. There's no surah in the entire Qur'an that has as many mentions of Rahmah as the surah. So this is a very soft surah. This is a very light surah. And that's why even the sounds that come in the surah have very soft sounds. Zakariyyah, Khafiyya, they all end with the a sound. If you go to a surah like Surah Al-Lahab, which is a very stern surah, all of the endings are stern endings. تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَّبَّ مَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُ مَالُهُ وَمَا كَسَبَ. So what you'll find with the Qur'an is that the form of the surah will match the meaning. How the surah sounds is actually very similar to what the surah is saying. Another interesting aspect about Surah Maryam, to just discuss more about the introduction before we get into the surah, is where it is placed in the Qur'an. Now the Qur'an has two different orders. The first one is known as Tartibul Mushaf, which is how the Qur'an is from beginning to end, beginning with Surah Al-Fatiha and ending with Surah Al-Nas. Then you have Tartibul Nuzul, which is the order of revelation. Surah Al-Fatiha was not the first surah to be revealed. Rather, it was Surah Al-Alaq. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. So in terms of the Tartibul Mushaf, Surah Maryam is number 19. It comes close to the middle of the Qur'an. But in terms of Tartibul Nuzul, it was revealed after the third year of the Prophet ﷺ's prophecy. Now, it's important to understand the context of when this was revealed, because it will help us understand what function the surah is playing in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this just takes us back to the seerah, in which when the Prophet ﷺ is 40 years old, he receives the first revelation. And the first 3 years after the first revelation is the time period where the da'wah is private. It's not being shared with people publicly. Only to close family members, only to trusted friends. No one else is hearing about this new religion, this new revelation that is being taught to the people. But after the third year, Allah reveals, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, qum fa'andir. Stand up and begin to call the people. It's time for the public announcement. It's time for the rest of society to learn about what this message is about. So the Prophet ﷺ begins sharing it with the people, and the immediate reaction is very hostile. People are enraged at what the Prophet ﷺ has brought. And they begin to persecute his followers, and that's where we get many of the stories, such as that of Al Yasir, where Sumayya radiallahu anha was the first martyr of Islam. And we get these stories of Bilal radiallahu anhu, who was brought out to the hot desert sand, placed on the ground, and a huge boulder was placed on him, and he was told to denounce Allah, to denounce the Prophet, and yell the name of Lat and Uzza, these false idols. And what did Bilal radiallahu anh respond? He said, Ahadun ahad. Ahadun ahad. He persevered. And eventually he was free. So these were times of difficulty. These were times of trials and tribulations for the ummah. It got to such a point that some of the companions, they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, when is the help of Allah coming? Are we not on the right side? Are we not on the truth? Is Allah not on our side? And the Prophet ﷺ got up and he actually became a bit angry, in which he said that the people before you suffered far more than what you have suffered. Be patient. إِنَّكُمْ لَتَسْتَعْجِلُونَ. You're trying to rush the matters. He was motivating his followers to be patient and persevere through the tribulations, because there's a lot more to come. But anyways, it got to a point where the Prophet ﷺ told some of his companions that why don't you migrate to the land of Habasha, which is Abyssinia. Because over there you will find a Malikun Adil, a very, very just king. A king that treats his people in the right manner. And so a group of the companions, they began migrating and they reached Abyssinia. They settled there. Everything was great. Everything was peaceful. And they were no longer persecuted. But the problem was that the Quraysh, when they found out about this news, then they began to plan against the Muslims. They sent Amr ibn al-As to go and get the Muslims in trouble there. So Amr ibn al-As, he goes to the king. And he says that these new people that have come to your society, they're no good for your society. They're just a bunch of troublemakers. In fact, they were the renegades of our society. And you know, even more than that, they've come up with a new religion. And in this new religion, they say things about Jesus that is blasphemous. Okay, the leader of Abyssinia was actually a Christian. So Amr ibn al-As, he's very smart. He ends up becoming Muslim later. At this time, he's not a Muslim. He says to the Christian leader that these people, they say something extremely blasphemous about about Jesus. So then the leader of Abyssinia, he calls the Muslims for a council. And when the Muslims arrive, everyone prostrates to the leader except the Muslims. This includes the people who are with Amr ibn al-As, and then also the nobles. They all prostrate to the leader of Abyssinia, but the Muslims don't. So one of the nobles, he calls this out and he says, what's wrong with you guys? Have some respect. Prostrate to our leader. And the Muslims, they told them that we don't prostrate to anyone but Allah. So then the leader of Abyssinia says to the Muslims, who are led by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, that tell us about your situation. So Ja'far begins to tell the story. He was a very eloquent speaker. The Prophet ﷺ chose him to be the leader because the Prophet ﷺ was a great leader himself. Great leaders, they know how to delegate to the right people. So he chose Ja'far, and Ja'far begins, he says that we were a backwards people in Arabia. We were a people who used to worship stones and idols. We were a people who used to eat filthy things. We were a people who committed immoralities. We were a people who pushed away the orphan and pushed away the poor person. We were a people who were entrenched in sin. But then Allah sent us a messenger. And this messenger taught us, he brought us the light. And because of him, we began to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We left our immoralities and we began treating the weak people with kindness and compassion. When he says all of this, then Ja'far ibn Abi Talib is told by the leader of Abyssinia, why don't you recite something from what your messenger has brought? And so Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, being very intelligent, what surah does he choose? He chooses Surah Maryam. Because he wants to appeal to the Christian leader, because this surah is going to talk about Maryam and Isa alayhi salam. So he begins, think about the scene. He's in this hall, he's in this great palace of Abyssinia. And for the first time, the Qur'an is going to be recited at an international level, in a different nation. And everyone is going to listen. So he begins to recite in his beautiful voice, and you can imagine it probably took about 10 minutes to recite from beginning to end. And the entire hall is filled with his beautiful recitation. The nobles are humbled at hearing this, and the king is brought to tears. And he picks up a stick, a small little twig, and he says that what you have recited and what you have mentioned about Isa alayhi salam is no different than what I believe about Isa alayhi salam. And then he compares it to the stick, that it doesn't go any further than what the stick is. Very small twig. He says it's barely any different. In other words, I agree with what you are saying. And then from that point on, the king tells Amr ibn al-As and the other people who had come to create problems for the Muslims that you guys can go your way, the Muslims are going to stay with us. So it was this surah that had that impact. Now, one of the things we notice about Surah Maryam, and this is a good practice to do for anyone when you're studying a surah, is to look at the surahs around it. Because the surahs around it will unlock details, will unlock secrets about the surah that you are studying. Before Surah Maryam, there are two surahs. Number one, you have Suratul Isra. And number two, you have Suratul Kahf. Both of these surahs, they focus on supernatural events, on miracles. So you find, for example, the story of the cave, where the people end up sleeping for 300 years. You also find the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr. And so this Surah Maryam is going to continue that theme of supernatural events. Also in these two surahs, you find that it talks about the Ahlul Kitab. In Surah Maryam, that theme will also continue. In the two surahs after, you'll find that there is Surah Taha and Surah Al-Anbiya. Both of these surahs, they focus on these stories of the prophets. And you'll find the same theme in Surah Maryam. So Surah Maryam is situated in between these surahs. It's continuing what came in the previous two surahs, and it's also following the same theme as the two surahs after it. So with that brief introduction, we'll go ahead and begin with Surah Maryam. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كاف ها يا عين صاد. These letters are known as al-huruf al-muqatta'a, which are translated as the disjointed letters. You'll find at the beginning of 29 surahs that they begin with the al-huruf al-muqatta'a. And if you were to gather all of the al-huruf al-muqatta'a, you'll get a total of 14 letters. Kaf being one letter, ha, number two, ya, ayn, and sad, and then you have more as well. So 14 letters. And there are 14 combinations of these letters as well. Like alif, lam, mim is one combination. So you get a total of 14. The number 14 is significant because it's actually half of the written alphabet in Arabic. So half are taken and half are left. Furthermore, a scholar, he took all of these letters and tried to form a sentence with these letters, and the only sentence he could come up with was Nassun Hakimun Qati'un Lahu Sir, which means that this is a wise text which certainly has secrets in it. SubhanAllah. This is the only thing that he could come up with these letters. Then what we find is that there are 29 places where these letters are mentioned. The number 29 is significant because there are 29 spoken letters in the Arabic language. 28 written and 29 spoken. The difference is the Hamza. Because the Hamza in Arabic was not written as a letter. It was understood, or it was put on top of a waw or a ya, and it wasn't written as a separate letter. Now, one of the questions that comes up about this is, what is the purpose of these letters? So I just want to start off with 3 facts about the al-huruf al-muqatta'a. The first fact is that no human being knows what these letters mean. No human being knows what these letters mean. It doesn't matter which scholar says what these mean, even to the point where the Sahaba didn't even know what these mean, even though many great Sahaba and many scholars, they made attempts to understand these letters. There's nothing wrong with making attempts. But no one can say with certainty that this is what the al-huruf al-muqatta'a mean. The second thing is that just because we don't know what it means, it is not to say that it doesn't have a meaning. Because letters in the Arabic language have a meaning. And surely they would not come as an ayah unless they had meaning. Allah gave us a book that is filled with meaning. And so you find indications of this in the Arabic language. Very interesting to see that certain letters will indicate certain meanings within a word. So for example, the letter sheen is used for words that have something to do with spreading. Because when you say the sound sheen, then the air is actually spreading in your mouth. So when you say shajara, which means a tree, the branches are spreading. Shams, which is sun, the rays are spreading. Sharar, which is flames spread very quickly. Shar, which is evil, also spreads very quickly. Then you have other letters such as ghain. Ghain has to do with hiding, which is why we call the sunset prayer maghrib, because the sun is going into hiding. And ghaib, which is the unseen, is also hidden from us. Gharq is to drown, because the person who's drowning is getting hidden under the water. Then you have the fa sound, which has to do with opening. Fatiha is the opener. The word fasiq is someone who sins openly. And we can just keep going on with all of the letters. The letters, they indicate meanings. Every letter in the Arabic language has a meaning to it, and you won't find this in any other language, such as English. You will not find this, right? This is one of the special characteristics of the Arabic language. The last point is that Allah and His Messenger know what these mean. Now, what is the benefit of these letters? The first benefit is that they serve as attention grabbers. So for example, if all of you were to be speaking, and all of a sudden I got the mic and I said, Alif Lam Mim, everyone would go quiet and look towards me and expect me to say something after that. So when these surahs begin, they are actually grabbing your attention so that you can be prepared for what's coming next. This is the first benefit. The second benefit is that it is a challenge to the Quraysh that brings something like this Qur'an. And what we find is that after these al-huruf al-muqatta' are mentioned in any surah, the next verse will talk about the Qur'an. Alif Lam Mim, dhalika al-kitab. Alif Lam Ra, tilka ayatul kitab. It always refers to the Qur'an right after the al-huruf al-muqatta' because it's saying to the Quraysh, we've used 14 letters, we've done our part of the challenge, now you take the other 14 letters and try to create something like it and you'll not be able to. You won't be able to. So this is the second purpose that it serves. Now, we can go forward from here. Kaf ha ya ayn sad, dhikru rahmati rabbika abdahu Zakariyyah. This is the mention of the mercy of your Lord upon His servant Zakariyyah. This story is starting off with someone who is named Zakariyyah, and we'll talk about exactly who he is. But one thing to mention here is that it mentions Rabbika. It is the mention of your Lord. It doesn't say Zakariyyah's Lord. It doesn't say the Lord of all of humanity, but rather your Lord, referring to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, reminding him that what these stories are about to mention are meant to serve as a lesson for you. That when you go through tribulations, learn from the story of Zakariyyah. When you go through the trials of Makkah, learn from the story of Maryam alayhi salam. When you go through the difficulties and you go through the battles, learn from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who was also persecuted for his deen. So, ذِكْرُ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّكَ عَبْدَهُ Zakariyyah. Then the story begins. إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ نِدَاءً خَفِيًّا. One thing you'll note about the Qur'an is that when a story begins, it just throws you into the scene. It doesn't start off by introducing the characters. It just throws you directly into the scene, and you can figure out for yourself what's going on. I'll give you an example of this because this is a technique that's used in stories and movies as well. So how many of you have seen the movie Dark Knight? Are you all hiding that you kept yourself? This is like the most popular. Okay, you don't watch movies. So in this movie, I'll just tell you what it is. The first scene is about the Joker. And the way it begins is that you have the bank robbery scene. Now everyone's nodding. I see people nodding now as if you've seen the movie. You didn't admit it before. So in this bank robbery scene, the Joker, he set up a mob in which each person is going to kill the person before him so that they could gain money. But the problem is that they don't realize the Joker has made this for each and every person. So by the end of it, everyone is going to be dead, and the only person remaining is the Joker. So with no artificial introduction, you know exactly who the Joker is at that point. You don't need to be explained what's going on and who this person is, but through the actions that have occurred, through the scene that has occurred, you know very well who this person is and how he thinks. And you'll find this exact technique used in the Qur'an as well, because Allah Ta'ala understands the psychology of human beings. He knows it better than anyone else. He knows how to captivate the reader. Alayhimu man khalaq. Does Allah not know who He created? So the story begins, إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ نِدَاءً خَفِيًّا. It begins with Zakariyyah alayhi salam sitting in a room all alone, darkened room, no one knows where he is, and he's making dua to his Lord. He called upon his Lord with a secretive tone. The wording used here is very interesting. The word nida means to shout. It's the word that's used for someone that if they're stuck in the desert and they're shouting to call for help, you would use the word nida. Because the loudness of a person's voice indicates the desperation that they're in. The word khafiyya has the meaning of, now we're in a dark room as well. The word khafiyya has the meaning of being secretive. So how can someone shout in a secretive or quiet manner? This is what you call in eloquence a paradox. It's one of the rhetorical devices that's used to create a contrast in which you can learn from both of the words. What this means is that he shouted in his heart. He was desperate in his heart. He called to Allah with a sense of desperation. But in terms of his outward demeanor, he was very quiet, because quietude and being secretive in your ibadah is actually preferable. It's better to do your ibadah, especially your extra prayers and extra fasts, in a secretive way. That way, you could stay away from showing off. When it comes to your obligations, though, it's actually better to do it publicly. So for example, your 5 times a day prayer, Sawm in Ramadan, Hajj, Zakah, those are meant to be public actions so that it encourages everyone else to do it as well. But when it comes to your extra actions, those are meant to be done secretly. So nida and khafi, and you'll find in the surah it's a common theme that paradoxes will show up to draw this attention. إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ نِدَاءً خَفِيًّا. Then he begins to call, قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي وَهَنَ الْعَظْمُ مِنِّي. Oh my Lord, the bones from my body have become weakened. He mentions the bones because they are the strongest part of the body. And in this, if you look closely, it doesn't say my bones, it says the bones. As if he doesn't have any control of them anymore. He's realized that these bones are not his, that he can't do anything about it. So the bones have weakened away from me. Meaning, I'm not able to capture, I'm not able to bring it back, they're going away. Something that I don't want, it's going away. وَاشْتَعَلَ الرَّأْسُ شَيْبًا. And my head has become inflamed with whiteness. In other words, I've become an old man. And the phrase of being inflamed is used because it's as if he's saying, Ya Allah, just as fire burns everything that comes into its domain, my weakness has taken away my strength. Oh Allah, just as fire rapidly takes over everything, my old age has rapidly taken over my youth. Oh Allah, just as fire burns and reduces to ashes, and those ashes can never be recovered back to what they used to be, my young age, my youthfulness, my strength can never be recovered as well. وَاشْتَعَلَ الرَّأْسُ شَيْبًا. But then he says, وَلَمْ أَكُنْ بِدُعَائِكَ رَبِّي شَقِيًّا. But you know what, my Lord? Even if all of these things have happened, I'm not going to despair. Even if all of these things have happened, I know that every time I have made dua to you, you have answered. Every time I have put my hands up for you, you haven't left me empty-handed. وَلَمْ أَكُنْ بِدُعَائِكَ رَبِّي شَقِيًّا. Showing the optimism of Zakariyyah alayhi salam when he makes dua. Sometimes we make dua and don't even really believe in the dua. We think that, yeah, we're just saying these words, but it's not really going to happen. When it's one of the conditions for an accepted dua, that you have to be fully certain that Allah is going to bring you that thing. وَلَمْ أَكُنْ بِدُعَائِكَ رَبِّي شَقِيًّا وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي. And look at the repetition of the word Rabb here. He keeps saying Rabbi, Rabbi 3 times, calling upon his Lord with this beautiful name. وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي. Now, Zakariyyah alayhi salam, the dua that he is about to make is for a child. Because Zakariyyah alayhi salam has grown to a very old age. Some say that he was over 100 at this point. And his wife had also reached her 90s. And he was unable to have a child. And he doesn't just want a child to say that I have a child, I have a progeny, I have future generations, but rather he wants a child so that that child can propagate the deen. He doesn't want a child for the same reason that many of us want to have a child. He wants a child because he's worried about the state of the deen. He's worried about the iman of the people around him. وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي. I fear those who are around me. I fear that this religion will not be preserved. I fear that the people around me who have went into their corrupt ways will forget the true teachings. Now it's important for us to understand the context here. When is Zakariyyah alayhi salam living? He's living more than about 2,000 years ago. And about 2,000 years ago, before Isa alayhi salam was born, the Bani Israel that were around him, they had become people who focused on the letter of the law, and they had forgotten the spirit of the law. In other words, they made the entire religion about do's and don'ts. But they had forgotten about compassion. They had forgotten about the internal realities of this deen. You see, our deen, one of the famous ayahs that many of you recite is إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. There's 2 aspects to it. There's iman, which is in the heart, and then there's amilus salihat, which is in your outward actions. There's a complete balance that's found in our religion, where you have orthodoxy, which is correct belief, and then you have orthopraxy, which is correct action. Both of these things are absolutely necessary. The Bani Israel had begun to focus all their energy on orthopraxy and had forgotten about orthodoxy. They put all of their energy on the outward actions, and they had forgotten about the internal realities. وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي وَكَانَتِ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا فَهَبْ لِي مِنْ لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. Oh my Lord, I fear the people around me. I fear what is to come after me. My legs are dangling in the grave. I'm about to go. Ya Allah, I want this deen to be preserved after me. وَكَانَتِ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا فَهَبْ لِي مِنْ لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. And when it comes to the preservation of the deen, this is something that should concern each and every one of us living here. This is something that should be on all of our minds, because in this country, as we know, the religious landscape is changing. It's shifting. It's going from people who used to believe, and it's shifting towards atheism, agnosticism, secularism, materialism. People are moving away from the religion. Just about 5 years ago, there was a study done of how many people identify as agnostic or atheist, and it was 15%. Now, 5 years later, the same study was done, and it's found that it's about 35%. 35% of people do not identify with a religion. And these are not statistics that are just affecting those people out there. No, these are statistics that are affecting our own communities. So we have to make an effort to preserve the deen of our future generations. So then he says, وَكَانَتْ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا, that my wife has been barren. She's been unable to have a child. فَهَبَ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. And this is where the request comes in, which he says that give me a righteous child from you. يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. A child who will inherit from me, and he will inherit from the children of Yaqub. Now when he says inherit from me, he doesn't put a min. يَرِثُنِي. But from Ali Yaqub, وَيَرِثُ مِنْ Ali Yaqub. Why? Because all the Ali Yaqub are not worthy of being inherited from. Not all of the children of Jacob or Yaqub alayhi salam are worthy of being inherited from. There's some good and some bad. So he says, min Ali Yaqub, وَجَعَلْهُ رَبِّي رَضِيًّا. And most importantly, Ya Allah, make him someone who is well-pleasing to you, and he is content with everything that you have given. So this was the request that the Prophet Zakariyyah alayhi salam made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now just from these few ayahs, we can learn a few benefits or a few aspects about how we should make dua, how we should approach dua. The first thing is that we do it in a secretive tone or a secretive manner, because this is closer to sincerity. There was a companion who was once yelling while he was making dua. And the Prophet ﷺ came to him and he said, your Lord is not deaf. Your Lord is not deaf. You don't need to yell. إِنَّهُ يَعْلَمُ السِّرَّ وَمَا أَخْفَى. He knows what is secret, and he even knows what is more hidden than that. In other words, he knows those things that you keep secret, that you know you keep secret, and then he even knows things that are in your subconscious that you don't know about yourself. إِنَّهُ يَعْلَمُ السِّرَّ وَمَا أَخْفَى. Furthermore, another second benefit that we learn in making dua is that you use the great names of Allah. In this dua, the word Rabb is used. The second etiquette of making dua, the third etiquette of making dua, is that you express desperation. You express desperation, that you really need something. The fourth etiquette is that you use eloquence. That you speak in a manner, because if you were to go to a king, or if you were to speak to someone of a prominent position, you would make sure to speak to them with the right language. You would make sure to speak to them with eloquence. So over here, Zakariyyah alayhi salam speaks with eloquence. Number 5, which is a slightly deeper point, is that every dua that we make should be connected to the transcendent. Every dua that we make should be connected to the transcendent, and this does not mean that you can't make dua for worldly things. But rather, when you make dua for worldly things, you connect it to a transcendent purpose. You connect it to a purpose that is for Allah alone. Then, after that, we have the next etiquette, which is that when you make dua, you should make it in a manner that is concise. This dua is very concise. You don't need to be very detailed in your dua, because Allah, again, He understands what you want and what you need. So these are all etiquettes that if you apply them, if you have the sincerity, then you will get the acceptance right after, which is why the ayah right after is Ya Zakariyyah, O Zakariyyah. There's no partition, there's no transition. It doesn't even say Allah said Ya Zakariyyah, but rather it just jumps into Ya Zakariyyah and it's understood. That's how quick the response is. That there's going to be no break. The dua is made sincerely, and Allah says, Ya Zakariyyah, inna nubashshiruka bi ghulamin ismuhu Yahya. We are bringing you glad tidings of a child whose name will be Yahya. Lam naj'al lahu min qablu samiyya. Never before has anyone been named with such a name. And this name Yahya is a really interesting name because it has the meaning of living, that he lives. So as Zakariyyah alayhi salam is worried about the fact that he is about to die and the religion will not be preserved, Allah names his child Yahya, which means that he is going to live. Meaning he will carry the deen forward. Another understanding here is that Yahya alayhi salam eventually in his life, he will be martyred by King Herod in a very brutal manner. He'll be decapitated. And so, as we know, that وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٍ. You don't say for those who have been killed in the path of Allah that they are dead. بَلْ أَحْيَا, rather they are alive. So Yahya alayhi salam he gets a very appropriate name, which is Yahya. And who is he named by? He's not named by his mother, father, he's not named by his grandparents, he's not named by some special person in his community, he's not named by another prophet. He is named by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. What an honor. What an honor to be named by Allah himself. And to get a name that no one else has gotten. Yahya is not a name that was given to anyone else. You know, there was a companion, there was a scholar whose name was Hassan al-Basri. And he received his name from Umar radiallahu anhu. What an honor for him to have his name from the great Khalifa of the Muslims, the great companion of the Prophet. And I imagine that he must have been very proud of that fact. So what about being named by Allah Ta'ala himself? How beautiful is that? لَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ سَمِيًّا. Now when Zakariyyah gets this message that you are about to have a child, he had just made dua to have a child, and now he's being told he's going to have a child, and his response is, قَالَ رَبِّ أَنَّا يَكُونُ لِي غُلَامٌ. How is it possible for me to have a child? وَكَانَتْ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا وَقَدْ بَلَغْتُ مِنَ الْكِبَرِ عِتِيًّا. Then he mentions two things for why he shouldn't be able to have a child. Number one is that his wife is unable to have a child. And on top of that, she is in very advanced age. And furthermore, he says that I have reached a point beyond what you call old age. If we're thinking about old age, we might say it's from 70 to 100. He's saying that I have reached a point that is even beyond the old age. Meaning I have gone past that point that you would consider to be of those who are elderly. And then Allah responds to him, قَالَ كَذَلِكَ. It will be just like that. It will be just exactly how it's been mentioned. قَالَ رَبُّكَ هُوَ عَلَيَّ هَيِّنٌ. Your Lord has said that this is effortless for me. The word hayyin means something that is not just easy, but it's effortless. The word for easy in Arabic is sahl. It's like blinking is effortless for many of us. Breathing is effortless. You don't even think about it. So creating a child in this way is effortless for Allah. It requires no effort. In fact, to create the entire universe on one hand, and to create a small fly or an insect on the other hand, is the exact same for Allah. It doesn't make any difference because all of it is the same. قَالَ رَبُّكَ هُوَ عَلَيَّ هَيِّنٌ وَقَدْ خَلَقْتُكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. And I had most certainly created you before, and you used to be nothing. In other words, Allah has the ability to create things from nothing. All He has to say is kun fayakun. Be and it is. And now when you think about this, because we're talking about Surah Maryam, this is all building up to the story of Isa alayhi salam. Isa alayhi salam was created without a father. Everything that's going to be mentioned in the story of Isa alayhi salam is a degree higher than that which is mentioned in the story of Yahya alayhi salam. Now does anyone know what the relationship between Yahya and Isa alayhi salam is? Yahya alayhi salam, yes?
We have some non-Muslims in the audience. Can you explain who Yahya is or Isa?
Sure, yes. So Yahya alayhi salam he's known as John the Baptist. And Isa alayhi salam is referring to Jesus. So both of these great prophets, they are related to one another. In fact, Yahya alayhi salam, he is the cousin of Maryam alayhi salam. So in a way, he would be like the uncle of Isa alayhi salam. Everything that we find in the story of Yahya is leading up to what's going to happen in the time of Isa alayhi salam. So وَقَدْ خَلَقْتُكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. Then Zakariyyah alayhi salam, he is so shocked at this news. He can't believe. He can believe it because he knows it's Allah, but he's in such marvel at what is about to happen that he responds by saying, قَالَ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ لِي آيَةً. Oh my Lord, give me a sign. I need a sign to fully understand this. Now, he's not saying this from a point of doubt. He understands it, but he just needs that extra boost of iman. Just like Ibrahim alayhi salam, he asked Allah, show me how life and death work. And Allah responded, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? Do you not believe? And Ibrahim alayhi salam responded, بَلَا وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. I certainly believe, there's no doubt about that. But I just want that feeling of contentment. I want that feeling of satisfaction, fulfillment, by seeing it with my own eyes. So Zakariyyah alayhi salam, he doesn't say this out of disbelief, and the reason I'm pointing that out is because the Christians, they actually believe, they think that Zakariyyah alayhi salam had committed disbelief in this situation. But we as Muslims do not believe that. It says, قَالَ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ لِي آيَةً. Show me a sign. And then Allah responds and gives him a sign that is very unusual, very unexpected. قَالَ آيَتُكَ أَلَّا تُكَلِّمَ النَّاسَ ثَلَاثَ لَيَالٍ سَوِيًّا. Your sign is that you will not be able to speak for 3 nights. What does that have anything to do with having a child? What is the relationship between not being able to speak and having a child? Surely you would have expected that there would be some other sign. Maybe his wife becomes pregnant. That becomes a sign that he's going to have a child. But his ability to speak is completely taken away. The relationship between this sign and the fact that he's going to have a child is Allah's power. Because the fact that he's going to have a child, when the means of having a child are not present, it shows Allah's power. And on the other side, the fact that he has all of the faculties to be able to speak, and Allah is able to take away speech from him, is also the other side of the coin, which shows Allah's power. Subhanallah. قَالَ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ لِي آيَةً قَالَ آيَتُكَ أَلَّا تُكَلِّمَ النَّاسَ ثَلَاثَ لَيَالٍ سَوِيًّا فَخَرَجَ عَلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ مِنَ الْمِحْرَابِ. He wasn't able to speak, and he went out to his people. He was the imam of the time. He would give the khutbahs at that time. And so he goes out to his people from the mihrab. The mihrab is the place where he was making his supplication. The word mihrab, it comes from the same root letters as the word harb, which means war. And what is the relationship between mihrab, which is a prayer space, and the word war? The mihrab, the prayer space, is actually where you wage a battle against these spiritual enemies. Because we as believers, we have 3 spiritual enemies, and the first one is shaitan. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. He's a clear enemy for you. His entire goal in life is to take as many of Bani Adam to the hellfire as possible, as many human beings to the hellfire as possible. He's made that his life mission. So that's our number 1 enemy. Number 2 is our nafs, which is the lower self, the ego, the desires that pull you in the wrong direction. And number 3 is the dunya. The dunya referring to the lowly aspects of the worldly life. Not everything in the dunya is bad. There are many blessings in the dunya. We are told to explore the world. But the word dunya itself, it represents the lower aspects of the world. So these are the 3 enemies which, whenever we do worship, whenever we do dhikr, we are waging battle against these. فَأَوْحَى إِلَيْهِمْ أَنْ سَبِّحُوا بُكْرَةً وَعَشِيًّا. Then he couldn't speak, so he indicated to his people that you should worship Allah. Something like if you were to imagine someone in front of you just did this, you would all understand that this is referring to tasbih, making glorification of Allah, remembering Allah. So he indicated to the people that you should worship, you should glorify Allah during the morning and the nighttime. Why morning and nighttime? Because what you do when you wake up and what you do when you sleep, what you do in the beginning and what you do in the end is indicative of what you're going to do in between. So if you're spending all your time on social media in the morning, and you're spending all your time at night before going to sleep on social media, then most likely you're spending a lot of time on social media in the middle of the day as well. Right? What you do in the beginning and ending is going to indicate what you're doing throughout. فَأَوْحَى إِلَيْهِمْ أَنْ سَبِّحُوا بُكْرَةً وَعَشِيًّا. Then many years go by. And now Yahya alayhi salam is born. He's a very young child, maybe 5 years old. And now Allah calls to him and says, Ya Yahya, O Yahya, خُذِ الْكِتَابَ بِقُوَّةٍ. Take the book with strength. Take the book firmly. In other words, follow the instructions of this book. Hold it tightly. Don't let it go. Don't deviate from the path. He's being reminded this because the people of his time have fallen into corruption, where they've left the true teachings of the deen. He's being told to take this book firmly because you have been created for a great purpose. You have been created to become the teacher of Isa alayhi salam, who will come very soon. And the kitab here is referring to none other than the Torah. Ya Yahya khudh al-kitaba biquwwa wa ataynahu al-hukma sabiyya. And we granted this child with immense wisdom. We granted this young child with immense wisdom. Now think about Isa alayhi salam. What is he going to do when he's a child? He's going to speak as an infant. And Allah gave Yahya alayhi salam wisdom, something that people get when they become older. But Allah blessed him with this at a young age. Again, we see that what Yahya alayhi salam is doing is leading up to what Isa alayhi salam is going to do. وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ صَبِيًّا. And again, we see another paradox here, where you have the word wisdom, which is coming with sabi. Sabi is someone who is a child, someone who is often impulsive. So these two contrasting words are being brought together. Then it continues, وَحَنَانًا مِن لَدُنَّا. And we have granted him with a special type of compassion, with a special type of love. The word hanan is that type of love which a mother has for the child. That type of love which when the mother leaves her little infant for just a second, she wants to run back and be close to the infant. She can't separate herself from the child. That's hanan. Yahya alayhi salam, he was so attached to Allah that he couldn't spend a moment without making dhikr of Allah. And he had a special compassion towards the people, because any leader, any effective, successful leader has to have compassion for their people. And we see this in the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who went to go give condolences to a young child whose pet bird died. We're talking about a prophet, a messenger, a statesman, an imam, a father, a husband, a person with so many roles. He takes out time to go visit a young child whose pet bird has died, and he very beautifully addresses this child and says, Ya Umayr, ma fa'ala al-Nughayr. Oh Umayr, what has happened to the pet bird Nughayr? This is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who once kissed his grandchildren. And a Bedouin man, he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you kiss children? Because for the Arabs, this was a very shocking thing. For a man to show mercy to children in this way, it was very shocking. You kiss children? And he says, I have 10 children, and I've never kissed one of them. He was boasting, he was like happy about this. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man la yarham la yurham." One who does not show mercy will not be shown mercy. In other words, if you want mercy from Rabbil Alameen, you have to show mercy to those people who are around you. وَحَنَانًا مِن لَدُنَّا وَزَكَاةً. He was given this special type of compassion, and he was given a purity. وَكَانَ تَقِيًّا. And he was from those who were righteous. So his mind is wise. His heart is compassionate. His soul is pure. His entire being is righteous. What is going to be the manifestation of all of these characteristics put together? Is it going to be the fact that he has nur emanating from his face? Is it going to be the fact that he can perform miracles? Is it the fact that he can perform tricks and fly and do these amazing things? No. How does Allah tell us the manifestation of all these characteristics? He says, وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَيْهِ. He was honorable to his parents. He was honorable to his parents. And honoring the parents is something that is emphasized with the commandment of worshipping Allah alone. In many places in the Qur'an you'll find that worshipping Allah alone and then respecting the parents. And when the greatest sins are mentioned, al-ishraku billah, committing shirk, association of partners, and uququl walidain, disrespecting the parents. وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَيْهِ. He was honorable to his parents. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ جَبَّارًا عَصِيًّا. And he was not someone who was tyrannical. He was not someone who was harsh and stern. And he wasn't someone who disobeyed. And then this part comes to a close in which Allah says, وَسَلَامٌ عَلَيْهِ يَوْمَ وُلِدَ وَيَوْمَ يَمُوتُ وَيَوْمَ يُبْعَثُ حَيًّا. May peace be upon him the day that he was born. He was born in an unusual way. So Allah clarifies that everything was sound. وَسَلَامٌ عَلَيْهِ يَوْمَ وُلِدَ وَيَوْمَ يَمُوتُ. He was killed in a very harsh manner. Someone who, if they were to see how he was killed, they would be scared. They would be horrified. So Allah reminds us, don't worry. Peace was upon him when he died. وَيَوْمَ يُبْعَثُ حَيًّا. And peace will be upon him when he is raised. So with this we close the story of Yahya and Zakariyyah and the story in the Surah Maryam. And inshallah in the next session, we will go to the next part which builds off of this, which is the story of Maryam and Isa alayhimu as-salam, inshallah. Lastly, I just want to close as we're discussing the Qur'an. I want to mention 5 obligations that we have towards the Qur'an, each and every one of us. And we should do introspection to see where we stand in each of these 5 different categories. The first responsibility that we have is recitation of the Qur'an, or qira'atul Qur'an. Every one of us should have a daily habit of reciting the Qur'an. And if you struggle with recitation, then you have an obligation to go and learn it from people who are more experienced. Every one of us should do this. Then number 2, we have a responsibility to memorize a portion of the Qur'an. Now this does not mean everyone has to memorize the entire Qur'an, but make an effort to keep progressing in this manner. Now, when, alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity to memorize the Qur'an, and when I finished, my teacher told me that you have completed the sunnah of the Qur'an, but you still have yet to do the obligation, which is acting upon the Qur'an. And acting upon the Qur'an is the third responsibility that we have. There's a funny story that goes in which a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he had survived and he was in old age while after the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. When he was in old age, one day he came out of his house very excited, very happy, and he went to the masjid and told the people there that I have finished the Qur'an. The people sitting there are thinking, what's so special about that? It's like if you have an imam who one day announces that he has finished memorizing Surah Al-Ikhlas. That would not be, you would wonder, like, isn't that something that people do with their children? So this great companion is coming and telling his students that I have memorized the Qur'an. And they say to him, what's so special about that? And he responds, no, you've misunderstood. خَتَمْتُ الْقُرْآنَ بِالْعَمَلِ. I have completed the Qur'an in terms of actions. I have done every commandment and stayed away from every prohibition. And then he went on to discuss what the last commandment was that he did, which was the fact that the ruling about knocking 3 times, and if the person doesn't respond, then you leave. The problem with him was that every time you knock on someone's door, they would open it. So he was never able to apply that commandment. And finally, he did it, and it worked. The person did not open, they were sleeping, alhamdulillah, and then he had completed the actions of the Qur'an. So this is number 3. Number 4 is fahmul Qur'an. which is going through Tafsir, which is going through understanding, learning the Arabic language. Everyone should have an intention to learn the Arabic language. And no one should be afraid of doing that, because learning the basics of the Arabic language are very easy. They're not that difficult. They don't take too long. Spend 6 months to a year just learning the basics. It will open up your understanding. I teach Arabic. I teach people for 2-3 months, and Ramadan comes. They're amazed at what they can do with only 2-3 months of Arabic. So everyone should learn Arabic to understand the Qur'an. How many of us get our bachelor's, master's, PhDs? How many of us are able to go through so many educational feats? Then what are you going to tell Allah on the Day of Judgment? What did you do for His book? What did you do for His deen? You understood every other subject, but you didn't spend any time trying to understand basic things about His book. And then number 5 is spreading the Qur'an, which is tablighul Qur'an. And you don't need to be an expert to spread the Qur'an. Each and every person here can share something about the Qur'an to a person that you know. You don't have to be an expert for this. So these are the 5 obligations that we have. We ask Allah Ta'ala to give us tawfiq. And lastly, I just wanted to invite all of you to an event that will be happening on February 15th, Saturday, February 15th, about 3 weeks from now. And this event is known as the Aqsa Conference, the Fight for Palestine in Aqsa. It will be bringing out some of the foremost experts on the field from around the US, people such as Dr. Hatem Bazian, who's an academic from UC Berkeley, people such as Imam Tom from Yaqeen Institute, others such as Raja Abdul Haq, who is the founder of Quds News Network, Zahra Bidlu, who is the head of care in the Bay Area, Thomas Alamuddin, who is a teacher at IOK, and also Dr. Ahmed Soboh, who is the head of the Shura Council in Southern California. So we have a very diverse crowd coming to this event, and it's a full day event in which everyone should bring their children. You should let your families know. Inshallah, I'm looking forward to seeing many of you there. It's going to be an event which is very necessary in our times, because there's a lot of ignorance about what's going on in the world. And so one of the goals that we have is to educate the masses about these issues, because education is what's going to lead to change, inshallah. So I close with that. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. And the conference, by the way, will be in Yorba Linda. It's a little drive from here, but it's going to be a Saturday. So leave at like 6 a.m. and you'll get there, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.